we can do this.
The inmates aren't happy with planned cuts in vocational drug treatment. Gradual clearing overnight with lows in the upper 40s.
Better to get old than the
breezy with a
alternative.
mix of sun and clouds, highs in the mid-50s.
Okay.
You're listening to AM 820 WNYC New York Public Radio. The time now 1:06.
Hello, I'm Robert Bork, and you're listening to New York and Company with Leonard Lopate on WNYC AM 82, New York Public Radio.
The responses to the Supreme Court nominations of Robert Bork and Clarence Thomas followed mostly partisan lines. But when FDR named Hugo Black to the court in 1937, some of the loudest complaints came from fellow Democrats. Of most concern were rumors that Black had been a member of the Ku Klux Klan. Royal Copeland of New York called the nomination of the senator from Alabama an insult to the nation. But in one of the greatest of all ironies, Black went on to become the court's leading civil libertarian, and according to many scholars, its most influential member for over 30 years. Going even further, his former colleague William Brennan claimed that no justice in our history had a greater impact on our law and our constitutional jurisprudence. Black's arguments are keys to understanding the changes in constitutional interpretation that have transformed our nation for the past half-century, which is why we've invited Roger K. Newman, author of Hugo Black, a biography, to New York and Company. The book is published by Pantheon. Mr. Newman is a research scholar at NYU Law School. Good afternoon.
Pleasure to be here.
It was pretty clear at the time that he had been a member of the Klan, and yet the Senate vote for him was overwhelming. Why? Was it simply senatorial privilege?
Largely, he was a member of the club, one of the most influential and powerful New Deal senators, and no one likes to vote out a colleague unless there's an insurmountable reason to do so.
Well, if the true extent of his activities in the Klan had been known, might he not have made it?
Oh, he would not have made it. I went through the statements of all the senators with whom Black sat, and he would not have been confirmed. But his Klan membership did not come out until after he had been confirmed and was sitting on the court.
Similar to what we're seeing now with Clarence Thomas, if people believe these latest allegations.
That is correct.
But he claimed his membership was simply political expediency.
Oh, it was. He simply wanted to get elected to office, and the Klan was a vehicle that he had to ride to get elected to whatever office he wanted to, whether it be governor or senator.
But didn't he do more than just attend a couple of meetings?
Oh, a type A personality like Black's is never enjoys a passive membership in anything. He was an officer of the Klan. He was listed as an officer in Klan letterhead. His was what was called the clad of the Klan. He gave the oath to new members.
Mm-hmm. But didn't stay long, a couple of years.
A couple of years in which he was quite active, not only giving the oath, but in traveling around the state speaking to Klansmen at different meetings, all in black robes. White robes.
White robes, yeah, before the black robes. Well, he had really grown up in a poverty situation, one level above ramshackle house, and in a very small county in Alabama, saw himself as a backwoods guy. What were his ambitions? How had he gotten to this point where he thought that being in the Klan was a good idea?
From the time he was a little boy, Hugo Black wanted to be president. He saw each step along the way as simply another rung on the ladder to be climbed. He didn't, when he joined the Klan, he didn't know whether he was going to run for senator or governor. It was obvious he would run for one of them. Mm-hmm. He joined. At first, he was supposed to run for governor. Then their internal Klan politics decided he should run for senator, for which he was better qualified than for governor. And he joined the Klan for, as I say, just for politics. But he could never rationalize why he joined the Klan. The reasons he gave were self-contradictory. At one point, he said that the rabbi in Birmingham was a member. Another time, he intimated that a priest might have been a member. I interviewed Black for 6 hours the year before he died. I asked him about the Klan. He sat back in his chair with his fingers kept together almost as a steeple, and he said, well, maybe it wasn't the best thing in the world to do. Then he leaned forward, put his hands on the table as if for emphasis, and said, but the best people in Alabama were members. To his dying day, he couldn't decide whether it was good or not.
And as a senator from Alabama, he voted the way, on the whole, the Klan would have liked. He was an anti-integrationist, so he was pro-segregation. In fact, when he was about to be announced to the Supreme Court, he was leading the opposition to New York State Senator Wagner's anti-lynching bill. He also maintained throughout his life a certain anti-Catholic bias. Things of that sort.
That was. It was an anti-institutional Catholicism, never dealing with Catholics as individuals. His stance on the anti-lynching bill was meant for home consumption. Hugo Black's heart was in the New Deal. His bill was the first one introduced for a federal minimum wage law, and the bill that we have today has been greatly changed, but that is, in its basics, Hugo Black's law. Mm-hmm. Hugo Black was the first senator, perhaps the first person in public life, to push for health insurance. In 1937, the last bill he introduced in the Senate was for a study of health insurance. He was going to incorporate the results of that study in a bill to be introduced. He had somehow neutralized the opposition of the American Medical Association. This was 1937, 57 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Actually, something like what he proposed wound up in the Medicare bill.
Yes.
But because it was really for people below a certain, with incomes below a certain amount, $3,000. But still, odd that it had gone through then. Who knows what medicine would look like in this country today. Also, Social Security, supported Social Security.
That's right.
So why wasn't there more Republican opposition to his nomination?
Black was an easy guy to work with. He listened to you his whole life. He incorporated in a bill or in his comments what you told him. He did not go after people on personal grounds. And that sheer agreeability was very important to many Republicans.
But he's described as a leftist by writers of the time. And I've never heard a Republican say a nice thing about a leftist.
Oh, he was a leftist, but he was a nice guy.
Oh, a nice
and
leftist.
He's a nice leftist, so they can work with him. So they didn't vote against him for the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm. Then he was a nice guy, but when he made it to the court, he had problems from the start because he forgot that being a nice guy got him things, and he started, he got rather brash, became a dissenter on an awful lot of decisions in a way that rubbed the other justices the wrong way.
Well, when he got on the court, almost immediately he started clashing with Justice Felix Frankfurter. Frankfurter was a very smart man.
Well, Frankfurter came on after him.
After Black. And within a year or two, they just started to clash continually on intellectual grounds. They just disagreed. They got along very well, but Frankfurter had a different viewpoint of the Constitution than Black. To Black, the Constitution was essentially straightforward. He became gradually a literalist. Frankfurter saw meanings and mirrors within each word, and he tried to balance one word against the next. They tried to understand what the history meant. Black said, well, let's go back and look at the history of that the framers wrote and what was in their minds when they wrote it, and the evils that they were writing to prevent. And Frankfurter said, well, let's look to England and see what's happened since the Constitution was written. And there was a clash.
We have two guys both claiming to be strict constructionists, but with very different visions and applying that standard in very different ways. But he also had problems because a reporter dug up the proof that he'd been a member of the Klan, and he was in rather shaky ground for a while, wasn't he? He had to go on the radio?
He went on the radio.
Like a Checkers speech?
Almost like Checkers. There was no mink coat. All that there was undeniable proof that he had been a member of the Klan. He admitted his membership, and at the same time, he said, the Constitution is the heart of this country, and the Bill of Rights is the heart of the Constitution, and the First Amendment, in turn, is the heart of that Bill of Rights. And I stand wholeheartedly on the First Amendment. And that pretty much mollified his critics, and he said he would never talk about his Klan membership again publicly, and he never did.
My guest on New York and Company is Roger K. Newman, a research scholar at New York University School of Law. He has been working for quite a few years on this biography of Hugo Black, spoke to the man himself, and had access to all the papers. As a result, probably has produced the book that will be the standard for a very long time. People may argue over legal matters, but not over most of the facts included here. I know that you really did have a lot of stuff available to you, and do you have any idea of what role FDR wanted him to play on the court? Did he want him to stir things up? Because this is right after the court packing scheme fell apart.
Black was appointed to the court simply to ensure that the New Deal could continue and that the judges would not knock down New Deal passed laws. That was the basic reason Black was appointed to the court. All the other matters, the enforcing the Bill of Rights, came a little bit later. But at the time, just ensuring the survival of the New Deal was the most important thing on Black's and Roosevelt's mind.
President Clinton said he feared polarizing the court if his nominees were seen as too liberal. He said that Ginsburg and Breyer were consensus seekers. Was Black seen in the same way?
Well, Black was a master at building a consensus in the Senate and on the court, but he never looked upon himself as a consensus seeker, nor do I think anybody who ever talked about him has looked upon him that way. Black was always trying to advance his specific viewpoint. But he liked to tell a story that in the Senate there was a senator who introduced two bills, his own bill and the one he thought that could actually get passed. Black, in effect, tried to do both on the court. He would advance what we might consider far-out views. On the other hand, he would have a fallback position, saying, well, if we can't get that, maybe we can get part of it. And he would bring the stragglers along and then build that into a new consensus and then wait a few more years, and each year he'd go a little bit further.
And really wound up, surprisingly, becoming the intellectual center of a court, a man who had 2 years of law school, graduated from high school.
No, he was a high school dropout. He never went to a teacher punished his sister in a way that he did not think was appropriate. And he complained to the teacher, never again attended that high school. So when he went to the University of Alabama, he wanted to be admitted to the undergraduate college. The president would not let him because he didn't have a high school diploma. So he went right across the street to the law school, which did not require a diploma, and went there.
And yet we wind up with a man who brings the court along with him on prayer in the schools, on the right to legal representation, on most of the important legal issues of our time. A man who did not have the kind of training that some of the other members of the court had, was not a legal scholar. And we'll take a little break, and when we come back, we'll find out how he did that. My guest is Roger K. Newman. His book, Hugo Black, a biography, is published by Pantheon. You're listening to New York and Company on AM 820 WNYC, New York Public Radio.
Hello, I'm Verda May Grosvenor. Here
Are we
at
going
Okay.
okay?
Going fine. We'll just get in. I'll bring in the. Yeah, we'll go. I'll go into the
I'm
classics.
dropping this thing where I was going to ask
with the
about,
most
unless you
savory
think you can get us
holiday
in
of all,
somewhere. I had written this.
Thanksgiving.
Justice
All you
is
need to
often
bring to our
surprised.
table
Liberals,
is an
Brennan and
appetite.
Blackman, were named by
We're serving
Republicans,
a
conservative
Thanksgiving
Byron
feast.
White. My guest on New York and Company is Roger K. Newman, author of Hugo Black, a biography. Hugo Black may not be the most famous name of a Supreme Court justice, at least in your mind, and yet some people suggest that the Warren Court should have been called the Black Court. He was its intellectual center. And this is something that really started manifesting itself around 1940, 3 years after he was on the court, or had he already become a dynamic figure before then?
He was starting, but in 3 years, 1940, with the Chambers case, Black became the focal point, sort of the intellectual leader of the court. Chambers was a case from Florida in which several young, illiterate blacks were accused and convicted, largely via third-degree confessions of some heinous crimes. Black said that no such crimes, no such prosecutions should ever take place, and he called these victims young, poor, victims of public excitement and hysteria, and that the Constitution applies to everyone who comes under its purview.
So now when they move a case from one place to another in order to ensure a fair trial, that comes directly out of this?
Well, it certainly